WWDC 2022 was jam-packed with new hardware and software releases from Apple, including the brand new MacBook Air alongside the M2 Silicon, and we also got macOS Ventura and iOS and iPadOS 16. But you're probably thinking that I left one thing out, and that is the MacBook Pro 13-inch, the new and improved MacBook Pro with M2. And the reason I left it out is because Apple probably should have done the same thing and left the 13-inch MacBook Pro out of this announcement altogether, and probably should have just discontinued this PC from their lineup. I mean, with the new introduction of the MacBook Air having now a bigger screen than the 13-inch MacBook Pro, having the exact same hardware and software as the MacBook Pro, and also having a cheaper price, or if not the same price as the 13-inch MacBook Pro, it doesn't really make any sense to go out and buy a MacBook Pro 13 when you can just go and get a MacBook Air. It's lighter, it's thinner, it has the all-new design, MagSafe, everything that you would expect from the MacBook Pro 13-inch, but better, minus a touch bar. And not very many people are super intrigued by the touch bar anyways, so yeah, probably just go out and get a MacBook Air. But I understand why Apple has come out with the MacBook Pro 13-inch. I mean, there's a very tempting question posed by Apple: which Mac notebook is the right one for you? And now in a lineup with the MacBook Air with M1, the MacBook Air with M2, your MacBook Pro 13-inch with M2, and the MacBook Pro 14-inch and 16-inch with M1 Pro and M1 Max, there's just not really any room for that MacBook Pro 13-inch in this lineup. Comparing it side to side with the MacBook Air nets you a more expensive laptop with a smaller screen, the same chip, the same amount of memory and storage available, and only 2 hours more battery life, and a touch bar like I mentioned. So it's more expensive at the cheapest model, with less features and less functionality. Now, it does have 2 more GPU cores at its lowest end version, but when you spec these things exactly the same with an 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU with the M2 Silicon, the same amount of storage and memory, they're the exact same price at $1,499. And if you're going to step it up to a more expensive version, you're just better off going MacBook Pro 14-inch, getting more ports, better screen, better resolution, better keyboard, better everything with that 14-inch or even 16-inch MacBook Pro. So then why did Apple keep this MacBook Pro 13-inch around? And for me, it's kind of become the iPhone SE of the MacBook lineup. They've repurposed an old chassis that they've used for years now that is tried and true. It's kind of the go-to for a lot of college students, a lot of, starting out professionals or entrepreneurs. You get a MacBook Pro 13-inch. It's got the Pro moniker right in the name. And it makes you believe that you're getting a better item or a better product than you would with a MacBook Air, but that's just not the case anymore compared to the new and improved MacBook Air with M2. So just as Apple takes an old iPhone, like the body of an iPhone 8, and throws in a brand new A14 or A15 Bionic chip, some better battery life, a new and improved camera, we're doing the same thing with the MacBook Pro 13-inch. We're taking a tried and true chassis, throwing in the M2 Silicon, some better ports, a little bit better battery life, and we're calling it a new model. But it's easy to recommend an iPhone SE because you're getting super great hardware inside of an older chassis at a much lower price point than you would a iPhone 13 or iPhone 13 Pro. The same can't be said for the MacBook Pro 13-inch. You're getting an old chassis with new and improved hardware, but it's the same price as the MacBook Air M2 with that new hardware and a brand new design. So what does this all mean for the life and end of life of the MacBook Pro 13-inch? I probably wouldn't expect the MacBook Pro 13-inch to last much longer in Apple's lineup. It's plenty clear they're replacing it, or trying to replace it, with the MacBook Air, and with the ability to, if you need more power, go up to a MacBook Pro 14-inch or 16-inch. I mean, the 13-inch MacBook Pro doesn't even allow you to get the M1 Pro chip inside of it. So how pro is the MacBook Pro 13-inch? I don't know, but if you needed extra power, you could always step it up to a 14-inch MacBook Pro, giving you slightly more screen real estate, a much better chassis design with way more ports and accessibility features on that PC than you're getting from a MacBook Pro 13-inch. So overall, I probably wouldn't expect the MacBook Pro 13-inch to last much longer in the Apple lineup. I probably give it a year, maybe 2 years for whenever we get the next generation of 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro with M2 or M2 Pro, M2 Max, whatever that moniker is. Maybe that's when the MacBook Pro 13-inch goes away. There's just not really a need for it in this lineup anymore between the MacBook Air and the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. But what do you guys think? Is the MacBook Pro 13-inch still a viable option if you're looking to buy a new MacBook, or would you just go with the MacBook Air or step it up to a 14-inch MacBook Pro? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, get subscribed to the channel, turn on post notifications. I have a few videos coming up going over some new laptop hardware on the Windows side, as well as a recent upgrade I did to some M1 silicon from my older MacBook Pro. So stay tuned for all that. I'll see you guys in the next one.